Greetings, Blender heads. This is One Shot Al doing another tutorial. This one's going to be on drivers, specifically drivers for the hand rig. I'm using Blender 2.57b, which is available for free download from blender.org, and I have a file already opened up, ready to go. It's my ZinZin file. This is a model I got free from daz3d.com. If you're interested in getting some pretty cool free stuff from a free site, let's see. I've got her with their basic rig. One reason I opened up this file, it's not the file I'm going to be using for the whole tutorial, but just in case you watch my basic rigging tutorial, I thought you'd like a little update on her. I like to use a little trick of giving extra bones to the armature to pick up what I call stray vertices. You might have noticed by now, if you've worked with Blender, that if you happen to parent an armature to a model, such as like this one, and you give the head only one bone to start with, you might miss some vertices such as the ear and the side of the head or the front of the mouth. Well, I learned from experience that you start throwing some extra bones around and you pick up those stray vertices with very little effort, and as long as you don't have to manipulate them too much, it's no real big headache. Of course, you will eventually want to add bones for controlling other parts like her mouth and such. Well, I just thought I'd show her off a little bit before we got started. And speaking of which, let's get started. This is my basic rig that I've used for several years, with minor variations. I have her hand already rigged, but I've been noticing that I didn't quite like the basic rig for her hand, so that's one reason I have this file opened up, so you don't get lost later. I've modified it to the point of where there's the hand's getting kind of crowded. I started off with adding a little bone on the bottom of the head of her index fingers and middle finger and ring finger and pinky finger to help give a better crease underneath the hand where the fingers bend and meet the palm of the hand. It wasn't bending quite nice at all. It looked rather like garbage. So let's jump ahead to that file that I have ready to open up, and here it is. A few bones added to her hand for better control of the vertices, so that when I do bend the fingers, I get a nice crease right in between the palm and the fingers. I'm not perfectly happy with it yet. I think I could do a little bit better, but it's starting to turn into a complex rigging system that, for something that I'm sure none of my little cartoons about ZinZin will probably never really focus in on the palm of her hand. I don't know how much trouble I want to go to do that. But enough said about that. The point being is that if you're going to start adding drivers to your rig, you probably would want to make sure that you're happy with the way the fingers bend in the first place. Otherwise, it's going to look like crap and you won't be happy at all. Okay, so let's turn off of these extra layers that I have going that we won't be needing. For starters, I have my basic hand rig on its own layer. That makes it easier to work with, so I don't accidentally grab hold of a bone that I don't want to work on. It keeps the 3D view a lot cleaner. So I transported all of her hand rigging bones to what I guess you would call the second layer here, and I have another layer going for what I call a control layer down below, where I have 3 bones for fingers right now for her middle ring and pinky, and another bone for copy location purposes. And I'm missing the one on the index and the thumb because that's where I'm going to start the tutorial. Before I do that though, I like to give my armature an X-ray effect look so I can see better what I'm working with. So I'm going to jump over to the object window here for the armature and scroll down to display and switch on my wire view. This way later on, when I'm working with 2 layers at once, I can see bones through bones, and it makes it easier to click on what you're working on. Okay, so let's get started. First thing we want to do is add a bone similar to this, which I call my middle driver bone, dot left. I want to add one like that to the index finger, and the easiest way I found to start making bones for other purposes is just to grab one that's nearby, copy it, and manipulate it to what you want it to do. So I'm going to grab hold of this one here, the head bone of the index finger, and make a copy of that. Pressing shift and holding it, and pressing D once, we make a copy, and press G to see that it is indeed copied, and there, right click to snap it back into place. We're ready to go. I want to move it to a layer down below with the rest of my control bones, so we press M. That brings up our change bone layers, and then I click in the box, left click in the box that I want it to move to, just like so. Now it's gone, and it should be down below here, and there it is. Right off the bat, you can see, possibly notice that there's no dotted lines here from this bone to this bone like the other 3, and that's because Blender copied the bone pretty much completely, including its parenting, which it would be parented to this palm bone here. So for starters, we're going to change the parenting and get it out of the actual loop system that might screw up Blender later by having almost a separate armature going here. And the easiest way to do the parenting or reparenting is to select the bone you want to change the parent to, and pressing shift and holding it, right click the bone that you want it to be parented to, press control and hold it, and then press P once. It brings up our make parent menu, and we want to select keep offset. If I selected connected, the bone would jump over to the hand and it wouldn't stay where it's at. So we'll select keep offset, and now we have a little dotted line there telling us that it's indeed parented to the correct bone, the hand copy bone. I should explain that later so you don't get confused on that, but it's not necessary now. We'll jump over to our other side and see that we have a bone here that's already been made by Blender, and its automatic feature, which is the X-axis mirror function. You can find that if you're in edit mode and you have a armature selected. You turn that on and Blender will make bones for you on one side while you work on the other, saving you half the work. You bring that up by pressing T, and you can hide it away again by pressing T again. Alright, so for starters, since it's parented, we do need to give it a name. I'm going to name it similar to the other bones that I have here: middle driver, ring driver, pinky finger driver. I'm just going to call this index driver. It's going to drive our bones to bend the finger bones. So I'm going to left click in our little name box here, which is I don't know if I have my tooltips turned on, but it has a unique name by Blender, but I can't recall it right now. And I'm going to type in driver after backspacing the other ones out. And while I'm on this side with this bone selected, I'm also going to turn off the deform function. This bone's only going to manipulate other bones. It's not going to manipulate the mesh. So when I parent Zinza into the armature, I don't want this bone to pick up any vertices, just like I wouldn't want this one, or this one, or even this hand copy bone. They're all been turned off in the deform button. If you forget to turn that off, then it's going to mess up your mesh later and you'll wonder what you did wrong. So you got to remember to turn those off. Ditto here. There's a deform function right there. Turn that off. These should all be turned off. I haven't found a function for Blender where you can turn them all off at once by selecting them all and turning them all off on once. I got a feeling that there is one, but I haven't found it yet. And we're going to give this bone a new name while we're here also, index driver. And then we're going to scale it up so we match the other bones and give it easier control, you know, make it bigger so that it's easier to grab on hold of. And the easiest way to do that is to use our existing bones on my deform layer. And I'm going to right click on the tail of the index finger there and send my cursor over to it by pressing and holding shift and pressing S once, and send the cursor there by left clicking on cursor to selected, and jump back down to the bottom layer, my control layer, right click on the tail of my index driver bone, press and hold shift, and then press S again once, and then click on selection to cursor. Now I have a bone that's easy to grab and manipulate, rotate, or whatever, which will in turn control the bones in the index finger through its driver function. We need one more bone for the thumb, so we're going to do almost the same procedure a little bit backwards. We'll jump back to our top layer here, and instead of grabbing the head bone of the thumb, I'm going to use the tip bone. Reason for that is that I want to copy the roll of the bones while I'm at it, which for the index finger was 22 degrees. That's to match the little twisting of the index finger that you can probably see from this angle. I did the same for let's see, the pinky is 2 degrees. If you look at it, the pinky's not pointing straight up, so I got the bone roll turned to match the fingers. Same for the ring. It's bone. I added some bone roll to match the twist of the ring finger, and the same for the index. You can do that just by left clicking on these little arrows here and give a little bit of a roll to your bone to match the fingers themselves. But on the thumb, which is a little special case, it bends a little different from the rest of the fingers. I have this bone matching the roll of the thumb, and this one, and which will be operated by drivers, but this one, the head of the thumb chain there is just basically pointing straight up. Its z-axis is pointing straight up. It's almost perpendicular, going from left to right. 1.315 on the tail and 1.315 on the head and the z axes, and that's going to let me move it and manipulate it a little bit easier later. I tried adding a driver to it, and also had it bone rolled like the other two here, but it wasn't working out too good, so I took it out of the chain, tried something else, and I'll explain that when we get to it. But the point being is that when I copy a new bone for the driver bone, I'm going to copy the roll at the same time. So I'll make it easy on myself and just copy the tip. And I do that by pressing Shift, holding it, pressing D, pressing Enter, and we can press G to see if it's there or not, and it is. And then we'll send it down to the bottom layer by pressing M. Brings up our change bone layer. Left click in the layer we want to go to, and while I'm here I'll save a step and send my cursor over to the head of the head bone there, so I can position the bone easier on the bottom layer, which is easy to do. Just right click on the head, press Shift and hold it again, and press S, and then send selection to cursor, and we saved a step. We do have to give it a name again, and it does have to be parented again. So let's parent it right off the bat. Control, hold, press P once, keep offset, and right click on it again to give it a name. We jump over to our bone menu so that we can go to our value box and change the name of that bone. It's going to be the thumb driver, and we need to turn off the deform function, and we need to do the same to the other side as far as the name and the deform function. Blender by default is already parented to our hand copy bone because it had the same name while I did that function. And we'll change the name now. Thumb driver. Press enter, and it's good to go. Excuse me. And double check the roll real quick while we're thinking about it. It's now at 81.69, negative 81.69, and the tip bone of the thumb is negative 81.69. So there shouldn't be any problem later on manipulating the deformed bones on the upper layer here with the driver bones, as the x-axes and Z and Y should match up pretty good, which is the reason why I wanted to copy the roll bone, the roll of the bone. So that leaves us pretty much ready to go. Let's jump over to our animation window, and I'm going to get out of edit mode right now and go into pose mode and go into animation mode and jump up here, and we find out that we've got a couple windows here. One is the F-curve editor, or also the graph editor. Now one's the dope sheet. We don't need the dope sheet. We're only going to use the graph editor, and specifically we're going to use the drivers of the F-curve editor window here. So we want to select on drivers. There's no information here yet because there's no drivers added yet. Since we won't be using the dope sheet window, we can right click on the seam here and get rid of it by left clicking on that and then left clicking in that window to join them together. And let's see, as I've kind of thought about that, I haven't yet parented Zinzin yet to the armature, so I am going to stop and pause for a second and parent her. It's one of my little tricks to save steps, is to leave her unparented so that I don't end up with a whole bunch of vertices that I won't be using should I change the bones around. And as I improve the armature, then I add little numbers to the prefix here with Blender's automatic adding number function, and save them as I go along. It shouldn't take too long. Usually if I try to light a cigarette, Blender speeds up on me. And gets it done before I'm lit up, but it's going to make a liar out of me. So I'll pause for a second. Okay, she's parented now, and I'm going to give it a quick save while we're parented by pressing F2. I want to save this file number so I know where I was, and I want to save the fact that she wasn't parented in that older file and give it a distinction. So I'm going to give this file number a little prefix letter P, standing for parenting, and save over one of my older practice files here. And this is a cool function. I could add little letters here after these prefix numbers, and Blender will keep adding numbers. It's a good way to keep track of where you are in your files and what you've done with them. So I'll just go ahead and save that and move forward. Now we're going to start adding some drivers. I'm just going to add drivers to the index finger and to the thumb. The drivers I add to the index finger will be pretty much the same type of drivers that you could add to the rest of the fingers, so I won't go through the tedious procedure and bore you to tears, and myself as well, as repeating the steps for all of the other fingers. I'll just do the index finger, and then I'll jump to the thumb, which is again a little bit of a special case. And the way you do add drivers while you're in pose mode, and we're in the animation window. You could add drivers in the other windows, but we want to do it in our animation window so we can manipulate the data in our graph editor. And the way you add them is to head over to our rotation box, and we're going to right click in that, and that pops up our menu that is named Quarter Neon Rotation. I'm not sure how to pronounce that yet. Quarter Neon, I'll have to look that up. And it gives us a whole bunch of options here. One of those is to add a single driver. I want it to be added to the X rotation here. Let's zoom in on that to better explain that and turn it around. The index finger is going to rotate, but it's going to rotate only on the X axis. Now you bring that up on the bone by pressing R, press X twice. That brings up the X axis rotation function of that particular bone that you selected. So we want to only add the X rotation driver to this bone. The same for the middle bone of the index finger. We only want it to rotate on the X. But when we get to the head bone of the chain here, we're going to add one for X, Y, and Z. Press Control and the up arrow to go back to our other window. So we just right click. Well, we got to select our bone here. Right click in the X rotation to add a driver to that particular rotation, and I only need one, so I'm going to click on the add single driver, and the color of the window changes to purple, telling you that something's added there. I have a feeling purple is supposed to mean driver, but I'm not sure yet. And then over here in our graph editor window, we got some information that popped up. X quarter neon rotation index L001. and that's supposed to mean that there's a driver there now, and the information for that driver is located in this window, but it's located in the properties window, so you need to press N with your mouse in the graph editor there window. Press N and it should pop up, but it didn't want to that time. I guess it's too small. So I grabbed hold of that little plus sign right there. Now I press N and it pops up, and this is our properties window for all the drivers. Let's make this a little larger. We won't need the graph editor for this tutorial, and it gives you a whole bunch of information and variables that will change to enable the driver to work right. We won't mess with that right now. We're just going to add more drivers first, and specifically we're going to jump to the next bone, which needs a driver on the X axis. So we right click in there, left click on single driver, and we have another thing here that pops up, information on that driver, and it gave it a different color here. I don't know if you noticed that. This has a default color of sort of like pink, and this one is now green. Alright, so we're good to go again. We only needed one driver for that bone, and we can jump to the next finger, which is going to need drivers for the X, Y, and Z. So it's the same procedure. Right click in the X, add single driver, and then right click in the Y, add a single driver, right click in the Z and add a single driver, and they're all purple. So I guess purple means that it has drivers there. And there is more information that pops up over here on the left side of our graph editor, listing the drivers. Alright, and more information here in our properties windows, and now we can start changing the information in the property windows to make them work. I'm going to start with the tip of the index finger, right click on that, and if you notice over here, the driver for that bone has lit up, telling you that this is the driver. If I right clicked on the middle bone, the next driver in order lit up, telling me that this is the driver. To make sure that you have the right driver selected for manipulating in the properties window, you want to left click on it up here where it's lit up. If I wanted to manipulate these right now, I would have to left click on these individually. So let's proceed. Right clicking on the bone I want to work on, left clicking on the driver I want to work on. We jump to our properties window, and you see it's got a bunch of information showing cursor. I'm not sure what that's for yet. I do know I don't need to mess with it. I don't need to mess with this color by default thing, and this information here I don't need. I think coders and people that use Python script would use that, but I don't know yet. And we go down here to our window. It says drivers. We are going to use the functions in this window and the add variables here. We're going to change this, and later on we can play with this to better manipulate our bones. This is like a function to tell the bones how much to move with the driver, but we'll skip that for right now and start here at the top in the driver window. We're going to have to change the type of our driver. By default, Blender gives it the scripted expression driver, but we need the averaged value driver, so we'll change that right off the bat by left clicking in here and left clicking on the average driver or average value. And we got an error message that pops up telling you that there's invalid target channels. We're about to add some targets, so you can ignore that. And we'll scoot down a little bit here to our add variable, which is where we add our target. By default, Blender gives it a transform channel, which is what we want. If it's not there, you need to left click in that window and select transform channel. And this is our object bone window. Tells Blender what object that we want to use to be the driver. We're going to select in this window armature, as we are using a bone of the armature to manipulate the index tip. We'll left click on that, and then a little bone window pops up, and that's Blender asking you which bone specifically did you want to use for the driver. So we left clicking that, and a menu pops up of all the bones in that armature. And you could scroll all the way down here and scroll, keep scrolling till you get to the bottom almost where we can find index driver. Right, let's see, right there it is. Or let's left click over here. You could do it the easy way, left clicking that window and typing in the two letters IN, which is the two first letters of index, and Blender lists all the names here that start with IN, specifically the index driver, which we want to select, so we left click on that. And now you can see some action on that bone already. It's not the kind of action we want, but we're not done manipulating the variables yet, so we won't worry about it. We do want to change the type of action we're going to get on that bone in this window here, so we left click on that. We don't want it to manipulate the X location, we want it to manipulate the X rotation, so we left click on that, and we get more action on that bone. You might notice that it's pointing down right now. That's because the driver bone is affecting it a little bit, and I suspect this bone is trying to match up the driver bone's axes a little bit. I'm not sure exactly why, but the radians and the variables down here are affecting it a little bit different. We don't want it to actually move yet. We want the bone to be where it started, so we're going to left click on local space here, and that way the bone will start off movement right from where its default position was. And that pretty much does it for driver number 1. If we jumped over to our control layer, what I call control layer, and tested it out right now, pressing R and X twice, we're getting some movement. Pretty simple procedure, and yet functional. Alright, right click to snap that back in place. Go back to our deform bone layer and add a driver to our next bone up in the chain. Right click on that. The driver for that bone lights up here. We left click on that, and you can see it changed a little bit. We scroll back up, and first thing we want to change is the type, so we're going to left click in there and left click on averaged value. Scroll down, it's going to be transform channel again. It's going to be the target's going to be the armature again, and again it's going to be the index driver bone. So we type in IN there, and it gives our list of bones starting with IN. Left click on index driver. Again, we need to change the type from location to rotation. Left click on that, and again it's going to be local space, and we don't need to mess with these yet. So now we can scroll up a little bit here and tell Blender that we changed the dependencies, or what's otherwise known as the variables, down here by left clicking on this. and shooting over to our control bone layer and right click on this, our XX twice to rotate it, and we can see that it's causing the bone to move just the way it's supposed to. Pretty good. If I were to move it in the Z axis, it wouldn't do anything, which is good in itself. It's not supposed to do anything. It's only supposed to move it in the X axis. Same for the Y. Press Y a couple times and it's not doing anything, which is good. So let's jump back to our other layer here, the deformed bone layer, and jump to the head bone of the chain here, the one with the 3 drivers, and proceed to repeat the procedure. Left click on the driver you want to manipulate, and change the data on, and do the same procedure all over again. It's going to be average value. And we're going to scroll down. It's going to be the armature as a target, specifically the index driver bone. This one is going to be the X rotation, so we want to select X rotation in this window, and again it's going to be local space. Again, we don't need to mess with this just yet, and we can click on update dependencies. I'll let Blender know that we changed everything around, and move to the next variable, which is the Y rotation. Same thing, average value in that window, and again armature as a target, index driver as a specific bone, and this time is going to be Y rotation that we want to select, and again local space, and we can update dependencies. And then last but not least, the Z rotation, left click on that. Its average value, it's going to be armature, index driver, and Z rotation. You want to make sure you don't select the wrong one on that. Can easily do. Local space again, and again we don't need to mess with these yet. We will do some adjustments on those later. And update dependencies. Now if we jump to our control layer and select this bone, we should get movement on all of the axes that we have working. We'll start off with the X movement. Let me get a drink here. I'm getting a little dry. And we have movement along the X axis. Looks pretty good. And let's get a top view. We'll test out the Z rotation by pressing R and then Z twice to get the Z axis of the bone. And we got a little bit of a problem there. The finger wants to move faster than the bone, so we'll have to adjust that. Right click to lock it in place. I'm going to twist it a little bit here and test out the Y axes, and we got movement there, which is cool. We won't need to use this a lot, just a little bit to manipulate the bones into a better fist. Alright, let's right click it to lock it back in place. Press Control and the up arrow to go back to our regular windows, and we had a little problem with the Z axes, so let's jump back to our upper layer here, right click on that bone with the problem in it, and it's the Z axis that we had a little problem there, so we'll left click on that. And we're going to scroll down here now to our modifier window, and these variables down here manipulate the bones a little bit. this particular window right here will give the bone an offset, a starting offset, and this one here tells Blender how much to move the bone per se as to how much you move the driver bone. I like to think that's a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's obviously not. Let's bring up both layers at the same time here so we can look at that. And pressing RZZ, that's obviously not moving 1-to-1. As far as I can tell, it's not 1-to-1. This window uses radians, as far as I can tell. I don't know yet. I've been researching it, and if you're familiar with radians, you might have an idea what I'm talking about, because I sure don't. All I know is that this is supposed to be like a 1-to-1 ratio, and it's not quite. So I want to slow that bone down a little bit in the Z-axis, and I'm going to give it a 0.5 ratio. Now when I right click on that driver bone and move it in the Z-axis, the index finger follows it way better. So you can use the same procedure there to add drivers to the other fingers, and you're pretty much good to go. Let's check it out again on the X-axis, and it bends it in all the way right to the palm. Let's increase the window size to get a better look at it, and we're on our way to making a better fist. And check out the crease that I have there. Got a pretty nice crease between the finger and the palm. It's not quite perfect. I'm probably going to play with that later. I'm not sure yet. Probably never going to see the palm when I make a video of Zinzin, so I probably won't worry about it. Depends on how bored I get. And let's jump back to our regular windows. And I suppose I could point out right now that if you did want to make a tighter fist than what you're seeing here, the easiest way to do that would be to increase the coefficient for this bone and this one, and you could also manipulate, let's clear that up, the coefficient on this bone to make them bend a little different. The easiest way to do that is to, of course, right click on this bone here to select the drivers we want to change. Left click up here on the driver we want to change, and we can change the coefficient here. Say we want that bone to bend twice as much. We change the number in this box to 2, and we update our dependencies, and that bone moves, indicating that Blender's recognizing that it's supposed to move 2.0 radians, I guess, I don't know yet, per movement of the driver bone. Ditto for this bone here. If we look at it from the front, it's kind of bent a little bit far for a regular fist, just a hair far. So let's left click on the X function here, and we could change that by going to that coefficient box again and typing in 0.9 and update the dependencies, and it moves a little bit backwards to its original position there, and a little bit more like a fist. If you look at your fist, the bones don't actually come straight down when you look at it from the side. They're angled, at least the head bone of the fingers are. They're angled a little bit. So you can play around with that and adjust each bone individually depending on your mesh and how it's moving. One thing I do know, it's pretty hard to get a real lifelike looking fist, especially if you have a model like Zinzin. She seems to have elongated fingers, which don't really work well to make a fist. But again, she's not going to be doing a lot of boxing, so I don't have to worry about it. Alright, so let's clear our roll for that and move on to the thumb by pressing ALTR. Get rid of the rotation on that bone and go back to our deformed bone layer and right click on our thumb bones here. We're going to add a driver for the thumb bone here. Of course, it's going to be on the x-axis again, as that bone only moves on the x-axis. Ditto for this one. It's going to be along the x-axis, pressing R and X twice to bring that function up. This one is special. It doesn't have a driver. It's not going to get a driver. I'll explain that in a minute. So let's add some drivers down here and there. Same procedure. We're in our animation window, and we got our rotation window here. We want the X rotation to have a driver, so we right click in there and left click on add single driver. Got our nice pretty purple color again, and we got a driver added over here. By left clicking on that, we bring up its information. Let's do the same for this bone here. Right click on that, right click in the X rotation box, left click on add single driver, and does the same thing, purple color, and adds a driver over here. So let's go back to our first bone there, the tip, and manipulate that real quick. Same procedure. We're going to have to change the average value. We got the error message again. By now you know you can ignore that. And we need to tell its blender what target we're going to use, which is the armature. And we left click here in the bone window to tell it which bone to use. And this time it's going to be the thumb driver dot left. I had to type in THU to get that to pop up. It's going to be again the X rotation, and it's going to be again the local space, and we don't need to mess with this just yet. We can adjust that later if we want. And we're going to click on update dependencies, and again move up a bone in the chain by right clicking on it. Left click on the driver that lights up, and that changes our window. And again, change the values here, average value, and the target again is armature, and the target bone is thumb driver dot left. This one's going to be X rotation again, and it's going to be local space again, and update dependencies, and it should be good to go. Let's check out our lower layer here where the driver control bones are. Right click on the thumb, control up arrow to get a bigger view, RX to rotate it on the X axis, and we've got movement there. Alright, looks pretty good. Test it again, like say on the Z axis. It's not doing anything, which is cool because it's not supposed to do anything. Ditto for the Y, nothing. It only moves on the X because that's what we told it to do. Alright, let's jump back down to our regular size windows, and you might have noticed that this bone here is not moving. That's because it doesn't have any values assigned to it yet. This one's a little special. Make that larger here. I changed a few things around about it. I think I told you, yeah, I have it pointing up in the Z axis, and the head and tail are about the same height. That's so later I really only noticed that I need to move it a little bit on the x-axis to start with to manipulate the thumb bone, and I only need to move it on the z-axis a little bit to manipulate it. And adding a driver to that bone just wasn't working. There was no way to make it move good with the driver bone and get the kind of movement I wanted. This one is manipulating the x-axis, works fine for the two head bones there, and works fine for the rest of the fingers. As you can see, it's only moving them on the x-axis, so that's good to go for those, but it ain't gonna work on this. So let's jump to a file where I've already changed this around and added something to it, and I'll show you how I did that. I'm going to give this a quick save first. Let's see. I'm going to press the F2 button and give another letter on the suffix, or I mean the prefix there, and call it 002PD, P for parent and D for drivers. Tell me what it is later, and click save, just so I have it later. And then let's go ahead and open up the file I already have set up. Let's see, with the thumb ready to go. There it is right now. I've been playing with it a little bit, making peace signs just to see how well it worked. Let's get rid of that real quick, and let's press A a couple times to select those bones. Press ALT and R and remove the rotation. You get a front view. I don't need both of these windows. Get a front view again. I closed the wrong one. I like to work with the left hand. And let's get a top view, I guess. A little bit better view. And zero in on it by pressing period on the number pad. That centers that bone in the window, which is one we're going to be working with, so it's good to be centered. Now I'll show you what I did here. A little heads up on the thumb action. Right now I have a constraint on this bone. It's a copy constraint. It's copying a bone's location that I called thumb copy. And bring back the other layers here. I have this layer with the control bones, and then I have this layer here. You don't know if you can see it too well there, but here's a bone that's right here, and that's the thumb copy bone. That bone is a copy of this bone. Oh, there we go. It's a copy of that bone right there, the deformed bone for the thumb. It's scaled up a little bit so that it matches practically the scale of this one here. That way, I'm trying to manipulate the radians, so to speak, and match up the arc of this driver bone with this bone here, so it would rotate pretty close to being about the same. The big thing here, though, is that this is a copy of this bone scaled up, so I would get the same roll. And then I put it on a different layer. Let's see, make sure I got the right layer buttons here. I put it on its own layer to manipulate it. Let me get a drink of coffee here. After talking for almost an hour, your mouth gets really dry. Alright, So it's on its own layer to easier manipulate it and get it out of the way. And this one bone here will move on its own in the X axes and the Z and the Y. It's not moving in the Y. I don't know why. I ain't gonna worry about it. It's not supposed to right now. But this bone here, to further explain it, is parented to the driver bone. I don't know if I can make that any easier to explain it, but since it is parented to the driver bone, so when the driver bone moves on the x-axis, it drives those two bones that have the drivers on them, bending the thumb, but it's also manipulating this bone here, which is parented to this bone. And this bone is being copied by this one. Does that make any sense? I know the first time I heard that explained to me, I was just going, what? Huh? I don't get it. Alright, but after a couple of times of looking at it, it sinks in. So I made a copy of this bone, sent it to this layer, scaled it up to match the size of the driver bone, roughly. I think I should have made it a little bit bigger, but it doesn't seem to matter. So I matched the size of the driver bone and then reparented it to the driver bone, keeping the offset. I didn't connect it, it's just keep offset, and then got it out of the loop, so to speak, so I didn't create any illogical loops accidentally later, which is a problem in Blender. You'll find out about that as you go along, and you start playing with the IK inverse kinematics and whatnot. If you create an illogical loop in your bone system, the bones won't move right. But enough said on that. So this one, the thumb copy is parented to this bone. This one, the thumb copy, has the same role as this bone here. So this one will theoretically match up the thumb copy bone, and that has a constraint of copy rotation along the X, Y, and Z. It didn't move on the Y for some reason. I don't know why that is. It should move. I don't know. I have to check into that. Might be because I have a conflict between the drivers on this bone and the copy rotation on this bone. I've noticed that there is conflict there. One supersedes the other, so to speak. It's not really a conflict, it's just a chain of command. The driver overpowers the constraint. So let's jump back to our other layers here. So I'll turn on all three, and here's the driver bone, and moving that in the x-axis will drive the tip bone and the middle bone of the thumb, just like so, RXX, and cause the head bone of that chain to copy rotation of the bone that is parented to the driver bone. So we're getting pretty good movement there. We can easily make a peace sign like you saw earlier. Bring back our other bones, bring back just the driver bones. And I think there's only one thing that is slightly different about this right now. ALTR, clear rotation, 7 for the top view. And select this bone and jump to the animation window. And let's see, I have the right one selected. There it is. Right click to select the bone, left click to select the driver. I did play with the the coefficients here in the modifier box. Right now the tip of the thumb is moving at a 2-to-1 ratio, so to speak. I believe these are radians, but I'm not sure yet. One guy called this radians. I have to read up more on that. And let's see, getting real dry here. This one on this driver is still at a 1-to-1 ratio. That seems to be working good. Once you set your drivers up for your particular model, you can of course manipulate these in order to make your own model move better. This is a real simple driver setup. It's nowhere near as complicated as the Human Meta rig, but you know, I'm not trying to copy that as much as I'm just trying to learn how to do it, and it seems to be working great for me. And again, Zinzen's not going to be doing a lot of boxing, so I don't need a real tight fist for her. She probably won't be using much with her hands at all. Let's go to our default window. But for what she will be doing, it's easy to manipulate her fingers now, and simply right clicking on it and pressing R and X a couple times and say -25 to bend it over. I can give her a little bit of a natural look to her fingers and do it real quick with very little effort. And we got somewhat of a half fist there, so if she had to say hold something, or tennis racket or whatever, baseball bat, and it would be easy to manipulate those fingers. Ditto for the thumb. Right click on that, RXX to bend it over in the X axis, and we're getting pretty good movement there. Very little effort. If I wanted to manipulate it a little bit more, R and the Z axes, there it goes. It's moving now. Let's bring up this window for rotation. I don't have anything locked. I'm still wondering why it doesn't move in the... Oh, there it goes. It's now moving in the Y axis the way it's supposed to. But I guess if I try to move the other bones in the Y-axis, the copy rotation constraint is overriding that. Something I have to look into. So I can still manipulate it in the Y rotation if I need to. Right click to snap that back into place. ALTR to clear it. And there's only one other thing that I might want to point out. Press shift and hold it and get both layers here going, and the top view here, and let's select the index. Say if you did want to make a tighter fist and you get the coefficients adjusted, you might notice you're looking at it from the top here. Can't quite get it to move the way I wanted. I need to move my mouse. RXX. There we go. And if you look at it from the top here, and looking at this bone, it's not quite lined up with this bone here, the driver bone. That might give you some problem making a fist. You get a little tighter. RXX, and ditto on the rest of the bones. You make it a little bit tighter for a fist. It may give you a problem depending on how badly you want a fist. Bottom view here with the bones all scrunching up. Let's go to stick view and see it a little better. They're kind of scrunching up there, which doesn't happen in a real fist. So right click on the index bone there, top view again, so you can see how the y-axis affects that, which is why I added it. Press R, Y a couple times to get that y-axis function moving. I'm getting really dry here. It's probably my NyQuil kicking in too. Got a little cold. Alright, so you've seen the y-axis kick in. You can manipulate the scrunching up on the bottom there by using the Y, R, Y, Y, and manipulate around that around. And you could also do it with the R, Z, Z. Manipulate them around so they're not all scrunched up. And R, X, X, and manipulate it that way, and you're on your way to making a fist. And again, how many times are you going to use it? I don't know. That's going to be up to you. You don't usually have 3D cartoons last more than 5 minutes with a fight scene, so you would only need a fist for 5 minutes at best per fight scene. And let's just turn on one layer again here and select them all. Press Alt-R to clear them, and I'll go ahead and one last demonstration. RXX -25, or maybe -45. There we go. And RXX -45, and we have the beginning of a peace sign. RXX, bend over our thumb, get it roughly to where we want it on the X-axis. Let's get my mouse up higher to give it better control. There we go. And then RZZ to bring it out forward. And we have our standard peace out sign with very little effort put into it. Again, if you wanted to tighten up the bones on such a setup, you could manipulate the drivers and manipulate the coefficients, but that's up to you. So I'm going to sign off, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you like it, I'll be adding tutorials later, and peace out, man.